All right. So this message took a little while to get out, mostly because I decided to wait until my handy little microphone got here. So I now have one of those finally to hopefully make the sound on the videos a little bit better than it has been in the past. Anyway, so the message for what was supposed to be last week, I'll try to post. I'm going to post this one today, and then hopefully tomorrow's I'll be able to post up by tomorrow or something. We'll see. Anyway, for today, the thing that God put on my heart to talk about for the second message in this series about offices and application of being in your office is kind of a core concept that's essential to all five, which is the idea of the house analogy. Now we're all familiar with the concept of the church as being the house of God and so on. Like we're familiar with that. Every single one of us knows that the gist of that. The house of God is the church. The church is the house of God. That's the basic principle of it. And then we should know and understand that the fivefold ministry, the five offices are meant to work together in order to create to really fulfill the different aspects of the house of God. So you have these five very different offices, and the individuals in those offices work together to create the best form of house. So, if you look at the analog of an actual house and the things that comprise it, in order to make it someplace that you can really live and be comfortable and safe, it's not all that different from what you find when you look into the idea of the church and how it's supposed to be that on a spiritual and emotional level. So in that regard, we have these five offices, and the individuals in there work together to kind of create that stable kind of society that we can comfortably live in and be really not only feel safe, but be allowed to grow and develop and be refreshed and rested and renewed and challenged and all these different things that we need in our everyday life, especially in our spiritual lives. Because the one thing that we all understand is that nothing ever really develops in stagnance. And ultimately, the organization of a church is intended to draw us into an ever deeper and ever closer relationship with God. The cold hard reality is that if you hit a place where you're too comfortable, you'll oftentimes fall into a sort of rhythm of, just, how do I put this? You'll fall into a rhythm, and in that rhythm you'll only find stagnation. Everything will come to a screeching halt as you don't grow, you don't develop, you're not challenged, you don't really even find yourself in states of needing to repent because you've reached a certain level where everything is as it is. And you just sit there. One thing that I don't think people realize is there's no arrival point in Christianity. Okay, there's no point where you're completely perfect. And I say that tongue in cheek because in our perception, we look at something like Buddhism, and the idea in Buddhism that we're going to reach in the idea in Buddhist theology, as it were, is that you'll eventually reach a stage of enlightenment. And when you reach that stage, you're good in a lot of ways. You've hit that marker, and now, your role changes. Whereas in Christianity, we don't have that. You don't reach a place where, you're perfect with Jesus. Even I've heard people claim that Enoch, for example, was such a perfect man that he was taken up from the earth by God, like the chariot of fire came down to save him. I don't know that that's true. I really don't. But, I mean, even the idea of it comes from just like the very minimal amount of information that we're given about Enoch in the Bible. It's more speculative than, like, for sure. However, that's a tangent. But speaking of those roles in the offices, is that there's this need for us to constantly be developing, constantly be growing. And the other part of this is that the world will constantly be throwing different things at us to test us and, determine. We have to respond to those things every day. And that's why we don't have this thing where, like, you hit this stage and you've reached the top of the mountain. You don't reach the top of the mountain until you're dead. A lot of people don't know that. We're always going to be climbing. And the truth is that one of the best ways for that to happen is to be in places where we can be spiritually and emotionally challenged, just as much as allowed to spiritually and emotionally rest. And I'm talking about a lot of things that maybe don't make quite as much sense just yet, but I'll back up and kind of like break down the different roles in the office and how this house is built, as it were. So, which will hopefully make a little bit more sense as to why I'm talking about this achievement and so on, and why that's important. So, we tend to look at the offices as being like the structure of a house. It's an analogy that can really help us in terms of understanding why. Sorry, I got distracted. There was somebody doing something weird outside the window. Anyway, we look at the analogy of the house because it helps kind of explain this. So we think of it in these terms. You have your 5 offices: apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And when you break down the kind of reasoning, last message I talked about, I kind of like reintroduced the concept behind each one, their heart cry, as it were. And each of those heart cries is significantly important in the structure of the church. There's a reason why there's 5, and there's a reason why all 5 are very important for the structure. For your apostles, they're the foundation builders. They're the ones who put the foundation down and lay the baseline for what the house is going to look like. And it goes further than that. Their role doesn't end there. They become kind of like an overseer in their own right, but the foundation is theirs to build. Prophets function kind of like the intermediaries between they're the ones who are constantly like going to the foreman and getting more information about how to continue in the structure and make changes to be made as the house is built. Different facets of, how to make this better and what to do. So they kind of have a role like that. And that, that intimacy that they try to develop in the church, that's something a lot of times prophets are functioning in the role that they're created by being close to God. A prophet without a relationship with God is kind of an anomalous thing. The teachers are effectively the builders of the walls. They're the ones that are going to create the structure for the church. And the shepherds are like your electricians and water and plumbers and different things like that. They're the people who come in and make the house habitable. Like if you just have the foundation and the talks with the foreman and the walls, you have a structure, and it's, you can live in it, but it might not be comfortable, and you might have some troubles when it comes to bathing or going to the bathroom, or being hot in the summer or cold in the winter. You have a shelter, but it's not a home. You understand? Shepherds make it a home. And the evangelists are the ones who, they function kind of like the realtors. They're the ones that are going to put somebody in that house, because you can have the finest, most comfortable, lavish, and well-built house in the world, but if no one lives in there, it's not a home. It's not a house. It's not worth it. And evangelists have that very important role of filling that house. So when we talked about offices before, we leaned on that analogy a lot. I had to constantly go back to it and talk about it. We also talked about a body and how each office functions in like a different part of the body. Not today. Not for today's message. Today's message is to focus on that house. And basically the thing of it is that why this is important, and I talked about last time how we would start going into more of the application of, functioning inside of your office. We're starting with the house because, one, as I was talking about before, it creates the best environment for people in general to grow. If you have all 5 of these parts of the body working together to create the best possible structure to a church, you're covering everything, because those different kind of motivating factors, those different heart cries, they will push and pull different people. But you'll also run into this thing where, with each of them trying to build a home, we run into a problem sometimes where we don't always appreciate the other roles. So for example, we can fall into this very mistaken mentality of thinking that our contributions are greater or more significant than the others, which is, it's foolish. We talk about housing, for example. See, when we look at it from this house perspective, it's easy to see how, you can say that the walls are the most important facet. You can say that the amenities are the most important facet. Without the walls, there's no house. It's just an open space with water and stuff. Sure, somebody can live there, but it doesn't work. A house without a foundation is quick. It could sink into the mud. It could fall over. There are all kinds of different realities that they face. But when we look at it in those terms, it pulls out the fact that this is supposed to be a united structure that is completed and put together by a group. It emphasizes the importance of the community as a whole, and each different role in the function of this house. And it's not something that's always so easy to see when we're talking about it purely from the very real perspective of it being a spiritual thing. It's why a lot of churches are functioning off of one office or another office. During the office series, we talked about how there are different churches that are run, a lot of churches are run by an individual, by their lead pastor, and whatever office he has, he will, put forward. And I say he because, most of them are male. Whatever office that individual represents is often going to be like how that church functions. So a lot of churches, for example, are run by evangelists. So what they emphasize is outreach. That pastor is going to look for a leadership team who believes in the idea of like reaching out to the people around them, and that leader himself or herself in some cases, it doesn't matter. That leader is going to emphasize constantly to the congregation the need to spread and grow, the need to bring people to church. But when people come to the church, a lot of them are going to be dissatisfied because they're oftentimes going to find that, the messages aren't very deep. It's not as impactful as they would hope. They were told to come here and meet Jesus, and maybe they met some really cool people and some really nice people, and maybe everyone was really cordial or gentle or even fun. But there was nothing challenging about it. They didn't feel fed. It didn't feel like a big deal, or at least it doesn't after a while. Maybe at first it was really impactful, and then the second time was really impactful, and then the third time was less impactful, but it was going to get better again. Then the fourth time was less impactful again, and the fifth time was less impactful, and the sixth time was boring. You kind of see the picture here. And that's not to pick on the evangelists. We can go into this with any of the offices, and when they're in charge of the church, and you don't have that total structure. A teacher churches are another really common one. They emphasize the study of the Bible. They emphasize the study of the structure of living the life of Jesus, following in his footsteps. I've had a lot of people in the past think that I was a teacher because of the way that I tend to share and lead and so on. But they fall into this pattern of like really focusing on the scripture, and you'll see them getting into these heady debates all the time about doctrine and just fighting with each other, and it can become really crippling. And they also are the ones that tend to fall most easily into very religious practices, like, okay, well, your relationship with God is dictated on how much time you spend in scripture because of this verse and that verse and how Paul says this. It's a lot, and it's common, but their focus is on the Bible. Their focus is on the study of the Bible. And if you're not studying your Bible, then you're off. Shepherd churches will tend to focus on what relates to them, which is, taking care of other people. They'll focus on the love of Christ. And they'll focus on outreach. Oftentimes their form of outreach is like food boxes and things like that. It's not about they're not as interested in growing their church. They're more interested in deepening, taking care of others and protecting. And that's where they come in and do their thing. And I could go on. I mean, we could talk about prophet churches and apostle churches. Prophet churches being, they tend to get weird. I love me a prophet church, I'll be honest. They're the weird ones. You show up in a church that's run by like by prophets, and they're like singing, and they'll spend hours and hours doing worship. Like they might not even start their service. They pretty much just they fly by the seat of their pants so often. Everything's about the freedom and the flow of the Spirit, and wherever God takes them, they're going to go. And they don't really care about the rest of it. That's all. Is it important to have that, to have a structure to their message? I mean, yeah, it is, but they don't think that. So they're more focused on like doing whatever God tells them to do in the moment and how it feels and that kind of thing. Apostle churches I'll be honest, they're a little harder. I actually haven't had a lot of experience with churches run by, legitimate apostles, like by office, I should say. I've had a few people who claimed to be apostles, but they were really evangelists. And they argued with me about it because they were just like, but the word apostle means sent one, and I'm a missionary. It's like, stop. Stop, bro. But the apostle churches that I have been a part of, there's one specific one that comes to mind, and it tends to be pretty like, unfortunately, like a lot of apostle churches that I've been to pretty well become focused on the one individual, on the apostle, as it were. So if they're the person that's in charge, they're the main leader, the church becomes centralized around them, which isn't necessarily a good thing. And at that point, it becomes the kind of deal where it rises and falls with its leader more than its team, and which is the exact antithesis of what apostles are made to do. You know, you read about Paul and how he built his churches, and he found the team and made the team, and then he left. There's a reason why he did that, because it was about getting people involved and building that community, and then also not becoming the center of that community. Anyway, the point is, though, in all of this, is that the value of the real power, the real development, the real challenge, the real growth of a church exists when all 5 of these offices are able to work together to really develop something. And see, again, like, outside of that, we look at it as a house, and I'm gonna stick to that analogy a lot, again, like I did last time. And the reason being is because it's very important for us to be able to appreciate the value each other. Like with the Office series, you know, we went around at the final night of it. You know, we had a night of prayer and everyone grouping up, and we all prayed together over each other and listened to receive whatever God said in terms of, you know, what's the office of this person. And we had a pretty good, like, it was pretty good. We had a pretty good, like, thing. I mean, mine was apostle, Heather's was shepherd, or Heather's was prophet, sorry. Jeremy's was shepherd. Steph was a prophet, or that's how she came out. Sean was an apostle, Aaron's a shepherd, Shane's an evangelist. I mean, I could go on, but the point is that, like, we all have an office, and I don't know that we're going to do that again this time. I honestly don't know what God's going to have us do with the rest of this series. I'm kind of just playing it by ear. But I do know that for this house thing, like talking about it, the reason why we're talking about it is because this is central to all 5. See, the structure of the church and how it should function is a problem for all 5 offices, because everyone has a different perspective. You know, we look at it as a house because in that state of things, we can all see the value of each particular spot, each particular portion. Do we need a foundation for a house? Yeah. A house without a foundation doesn't work. Do we need walls? Yeah. A house without walls doesn't work. And do we need water and heat and cooling? Yeah. A house without those things is not entirely livable. Well, do we need, like, somebody talking to the foreman and, like, making sure everything's in the right order and everything, and keeping up with the legal constraints and all that? Well, yeah, of course you do. They won't sell the house to anybody without that. If it's not if it's not up to code, you can't live in it either. Okay, well, what about what about people living in the house? Yeah, you need people living in the house. It's pointless if people don't live in it. A house without people is just a building. It just sits there. It doesn't have any purpose. And that's important for us to remember, is that each one of these things has incredible value. Every aspect of the 5 offices, each office is imperative to the function, the structure, and the development of a church. I talked about, it took a little bit of time to go through the 5 different, like, kinds of churches that we have as a result of the offices oftentimes kind of, like, being separate from each other and building their own interpretations of what church should look like. because it's something that we run into all the time, and it's unfulfilling. If you're a prophet and you show up to a teacher church, it's what's the word? It's suffocating. If you're an apostle and you show up to a teacher church or an evangelist church, it's suffocating. There are so many, you just see so many points that they've missed. If you're an evangelist and you show up to a shepherd's church, it's so frustrating. They're not thinking about outreach. They're not thinking about bringing people in. They've got all these people who are getting old and dying in their churches, and nobody new is coming in. There's no new blood. If you're a shepherd and you show up to a prophet church, this is like you want to take care of everybody, but they're all so crazy. It's all so weird. And the thing is that, like, there are some who are not so far off. Like, teachers and shepherds tend to go together. In fact, there are some people who believe that when Paul talks about the 5 offices, that there's actually only 4, because they believe that shepherds and teachers are the same thing. A lot of that, there are some people who believe that, and it's based on the translation of the original Greek. But the thing is that there's also that side of it where those two can coincide with each other, or what's the word? They can cohabitate with each other very, very well. Evangelists and prophets can cohabitate with each other very, very well, and apostles. Apostles are, they kind of run the whole jack of all trades thing, so they can function pretty well in most of those churches. However, they will oftentimes struggle with seeing other facets of need that are not being met, or other facets of what's necessary to grow, to develop, where things are shaky. And I can say that a lot from my own experience and the struggles that I've had with church my whole time. I went to I don't know how much I should say about names, but there was a church I interned. I've said it before in other messages. If I get in trouble, I'll deal with it later. But like Bridgetown, when I was going to Bridgetown's a teacher church. John Mark Comer is a teacher. And that's how he runs the church and everything, and that's fine. But there was always frustration because they would talk about community, and it's just like, guys, you've broken community down to a science, but you're not doing anything with it. I remember having issues with that, or going to Rise. Rise is an evangelist church, and I had so many problems with Rise. There was so much that I saw needing to be done, but their focus was on things that weren't necessarily good for the body, but they were good for bringing more people into the body. Abiding Place, when I went there, Abiding Place is as a shepherd church in a lot of ways. At least that's how they function. And they want to just take care of everybody, and they've got all these people that are there. Destiny Christian Fellowship, that was a prophet church. That church was lit in so many ways, but they had so many issues with like the structure of it. Everything was so chaotic, and a lot of people coming in, they might have a good time, but they oftentimes were not developing. They weren't growing. They weren't being challenged, or we always use the term fed, and it's a reasonable thing. Their spirits were not being fed in a way. It was like they showed up, and instead of getting like real nutritious food, they were being given candy. Or that's not really fair. Maybe it's like Thanksgiving, but all they gave them out was candied yams. I mean, they're nutritious enough, but they're sweet, but they're not enough. You won't develop strong bones and a strong body by eating nothing but candied yams. And those aren't judgments per se against those churches or anything like that. All that I'm saying is like, this is the way that I saw it. An apostle going to these churches and interacting with them. I went to each one for years at a time for each. I think Bridgetown I was at the longest. Abiding Place I went to for like 2 years. Rise I was there for 3 or 4. Bridgetown I was there for like 5. And then Destiny I went to for like 2 years. So yeah. It's just a thing though, like just kind of that perspective. And of course, like people coming into our little church here, different offices, and they've had different perspectives and different issues with what they see as going wrong or not being handled appropriately, and that's always been a thing. People not being fed the way that they think that they need to be fed. So, off the personal side of it, and on to the point about the application here. This is going to be a tripping point for us in general at any point in time. So I'm like sharing my personal opinion about, what I saw. And that's coming from the perspective of my personal heart cry. If Heather shared her side of things, going to different churches like that, she's been to a couple of them. Like, I know she went to Destiny for a time, and she's been to Bridgetown as well. And, she would have a different perspective as far as things that were going on. And we might, like, coalesce in some ways, but then there are going to be other things that we don't see. Or that we see differently, I should say. And that's just kind of the reality that we run into over and over again, because we're all looking for things that coincide with what our heart cries out for. But we need to come to a place of understanding and appreciating the variety that's necessary. Like, in order to really develop as a church, we need more. Like, we need people, even like the leadership team. This church is meant to have a 5-fold leadership team. And there's a reason for that. When God laid out what he wanted for this group, he wanted that. And he told me who and what their roles were to be, and I talked to each person, and it didn't necessarily go very well. But I also haven't entirely given up on that. But my point is that for each of them, it's meant to create the best possible environment for people to develop in their faith. And not just in their faith, but also on the society side, on the community side. Because when I'll put this down for a moment. As we're developing as a church body, it's on a fundamental level that we need to grow into more, and to be more, and to do more. And the truth is if we only have like a portion of this, if we're a house and all we have are walls, people are going to the house is going to risk sinking in the mud. People are not going to be able to live there. There's no one to go get people to come live there. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be no running water. People are going to be pooping in the woods. It's just a bad place. It doesn't work. At least it's not the best habitat possible. At the end of the day, in order to have that, we need to be able to appreciate each other and what each of us is bringing to the table, and each of our different perspectives. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy for, a shepherd to see an evangelist's perspective, where their priority, their purview is to go out and bring new people to the church. Shepherds can oftentimes have an issue with the way that evangelists do that, and evangelists can have an issue with the way that shepherds just want to focus on taking care of the people there. And in reality, we need to come to a place where we stop judging so heavily each other, and instead accept each other for the variety that we bring, and appreciate the way that each of us has a different role and a different thing that we're doing. That's very important. A house working together bringing all those things to the table is the best possible habitat. A person can live in there, create a family, and that's ultimately what all of us want. We all want to be in a place where we can live. We all want community. And that's something that God wants just as much as we do. He didn't build the church as a concept so that, this one way of doing it could have what's the term? Could have priority. He built it as a community, a thing of different facets of his heart being represented in his church. And then on top of that, not only being represented, but being manifested and being shared with the body. I use the evangelist shepherd thing and the kind of conflict there because it's one that a lot see very frequently and a lot vocalize very frequently. And it's kind of like a good analogy to look at and kind of as a study, a case study. In reality, what they should be doing is appreciating the value that each of them has in this church. They're bringing new people for me to take care of. Great. The evangelist, I'm bringing new people to this church, and the shepherds are going to take care of them so that they can really feel comfortable. And then the teachers are going to help them understand the scriptures and the doctrines, and the prophets are going to help them deepen their relationship with God, and the apostles are going to help them create a foundation and be part of the community and connect them with the community and be loved and all this stuff, and they're going to bring everything together. We need that. I mean, think about, for each of us, there's nobody in the group who has never been to church and had that awkward time where you show up in a new church and, depending on the church, you get kind of the greeting that you face from that particular brand of church. Maybe it's the kind where you show up and everyone just stares at you like you don't belong. Shepherd Church. Maybe it's the kind of place where they don't care because they're so focused on speaking in tongues and singing songs that you're just another body there, and maybe a couple of them greet you, or maybe somebody comes up and gives you some random word that either scares the bejesus out of you or wows you because it was so dead on to exactly what you were going through, and this random person just showed up and dropped this on you, and you're just like, how do you know me? Or maybe it's the kind where everybody just crowds around you and greets you and tries to get your story, and that's actually really uncomfortable. My point is that we think about those experiences. We've all had them. Whatever you believe, you've been to church. You've probably been to church, and if you've been to church, you've experienced one or a number of those different kinds of things. And as a result, we now sit there and we look at it and say, okay, well, what's best? Well, think about it. If in this ideological situation, when we're talking about this church with these 5 offices, what if you had that kind of thing where what comes around you are 5 different people who are representing these different facets? You got one person who's focused on bringing you there and making you feel and getting you involved in the church. You've got this other person who shows up and they want to take care of you. They're interested in what's going on in your life and what you need spiritually and emotionally. You've got this other person who just wants to really bring you into the fold and make you part of this, and their focus is on connecting you and establishing you as a presence at this place. You've got this other person who's helping you develop an intimacy with God and community and different things like that, and they're going to show you this way of thought that's so free and different. And you've got this other person who's helping ground you in what you need to do and how you need to, and they're going to take you under their wing and in this way of helping bring some order to all the questions and chaos that you find yourself facing. Personally, I would have loved that at any church I would have ever gone to. I mean, damn. I don't know about you guys, but it sounds kind of nice. And that's the way it's supposed to be built. God's not God's not a fool. He's not the one who showed up and said, "Hey, let's divide people into 5 types and then make them hate each other." That wasn't God's plan. If variety is the spice of life, he created variety so as to promote a greater value and a greater ability to meet people where they're at. He could have made us all a bunch of machines, but he didn't. Instead, he gave us free will, and the fun thing about free will is that it creates a multitude of different circumstances and situations and development courses. So, with all that said, this is the application, is to start to, and I understand, like, we don't all see the different types, but maybe instead of, like, worrying about, is this person of this or is this person of that, and how can I better meet them, maybe the focus instead becomes, okay, well, let's, as individuals, focus on what we best bring to the party, so to speak. And with regard to that, we don't judge the others for the fact that they're not bringing the same thing we do, but instead try to value and elevate those who are bringing what they can. So, for example, I'll just use myself and Heather. Would it be, rather than worrying about whether or not Heather is going to, like, help people feel connected and all those kinds of things and involved and part of the community, maybe I let her do her thing, which is to, like, help people deepen in their own relationships and come to places of greater spiritual and emotional freedom. And maybe I focus on my own thing, and even to the point of saying, okay, well, I'm going to help her in that to the best of my abilities, and hopefully she'll help me in my thing to the best of her abilities, because there is overlap here. It's not as divided as maybe that house analogy makes it seem, but there's place for all of us to merge together and really, like, develop and really help other people develop. Because sometimes it's important to learn the value of, what other offices are seeing or bringing to the table here. It's important for, another, like, kind of consistent, easy to see form of strife is when you put prophets and teachers together. Teachers can get really hung up on religion, and sometimes they need to learn the freedom that prophets represent. They need to be able to, like, just stop focusing so much on, like, finding an order to things, and maybe instead, just let God move them. And in the same token, sometimes prophets need to be reined in a little bit. They can become chaotic and erratic, and sometimes they need to be pulled back to earth a little bit with a little bit of structure and order, and they can learn that from teachers. We all have a need for each other and a need to learn from each other and communicate and build together. It's how we grow. It's how we avoid becoming stagnant. And we're always wanting to grow. As I said at the beginning, if we fall into places of just stagnance, then we'll die there. It's a slow and painful, emotional and spiritual death. And see, the thing of it is like I was saying, there's no arrival point. We're always climbing that mountain, because that mountain is this life, and this life is always going to throw new obstacles at us. The one moment going back to the spiritual warfare series, sometimes we forget that there's a demon, or there's a devil, and he has a bunch of demons, and their whole job is to try to, like, create problems for us and strife, to move us away from development, move us away from God, to get us focused on things, distract us and mislead us and deceive us. And sometimes we don't acknowledge the fact that that's another facet of life, is that spiritual part. There's a spiritual enemy who's out to get you. Whether you believe in him or not, he's there. And ignoring him doesn't make him go away. So, there's that facet of it. There's just the reality of people and situations and society and circumstance created by all those different things. It's all there. It's always going to bring new obstacles and new issues to be addressed. So once you arrive, you're going to get hit with a windstorm, and then suddenly you have to deal with that. So that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of like the way that we never really arrive. There's no delusion of an arrival stage here. At least there shouldn't be. A lot of people believe there is. That's not in the Bible, guys. Instead, when it talks about becoming perfect, we become perfect when we're in step with Jesus. Like in relationship with him. And that's when we become perfect. In God's sense of the word. Because at that point, we're together. And that's what he values, and that's what is important to him. And that's important to us. Sometimes we're not aware of it, but in reality we are. That is very important to us. We can fight it, we can say we don't believe that, we can go places, but when it gets broken down and you find yourself challenged with the idea of being disunited from the people that you care about, it comes out, man. Every time it comes out. We're all not that different in that regard. Some of us are just more hurt than others. And we're projecting and disqualifying others as a result of that hurt. Anyway, so yeah, that's another thing to overcome. And that's what I got for now. Like I said, I'll try to post the next video up as soon as possible.